Mansplaining, what's up? What's up? Welcome back, everybody. I'm going to give y'all a couple seconds to get on in the channel. I'm going to be riding solo here for a little while Christian comes home. He is on his way home from Williamsburg, Virginia. He got to go to the exact same place I went to just the other week. Try to get centered here. Yeah, anyway, welcome on board and say hi as you come in chat. And give you guys a couple seconds to show up as a couple people get into the chat. Christian may or may not be joining me. I'm not sure. If he does, he'll be here late. It'll be hey Tanya, how's it going? I'm glad you could make it. I'm not sure if Christian's going to come. As I was just saying, he's on his way home from Williamsburg, Virginia. I don't know if he's going to make it in time, but he's currently on the way home. He might come in at 30 minutes from now or 40 minutes from now or something like that. And if he does, great. And if not, I'll just run this baby solo without him, and we'll do as much as I can get done without somebody to bounce my ideas off of. But hopefully, you guys will be able to be my my wall that I can my sounding board that I can bounce ideas off of. So as you guys come up with questions and comments in chat, feel free to fire them away, and I'll try to get to as many as I can. I'll have more time because Christian isn't here, so it makes it easier. So the bulk of the show today is going to be about racism. It's a topic that's really big, really broad, and really vague, and so I'm going to try to drill down on some key ideas. But briefly, there's a couple of things that I wanted to touch base on first. Number one, I seem to have solved my shadow banning problem. Thank goodness. Thank God. I was running into issues. For those of you out there that don't know, I was running into problems with YouTube tanking the visibility of my show. I am very happy to announce that has been solved. It took some creative thinking, but we finally got it figured out. So thank goodness that is on board, and I am now able to be seen again by people. That's terrific news. We are now fully monetized, so we're now actually making like pennies a day. Yeah, we're gonna be rich. Oh yeah. So in the meantime, yeah, no, you have no worries of us becoming elites anytime soon. But we are in fact able to actually make money off of our videos now, which is kind of cool. It will allow us eventually, as that gets bigger and bigger, for us to reach more and more people, bigger audience, which is fantastic. And I just cannot tell you guys how much I appreciate every ounce of your viewership, everything that you've done to help, especially Tanya. Tanya's basically my first client almost. She's definitely been one of my most supportive. So I appreciate you, Tanya. Thank you so much. And anybody else who's watching, I appreciate you guys. I also wanted to briefly send out my thoughts and prayers to those families in Texas who were dealing with the flood, the aftermath of the flood, and everything that went along with the flood. It was a very heart-wrenching situation to watch, as I think the death toll was up to over 100, and yeah, people still missing, people's lives are destroyed, so that's terrible. It's always never fun to watch something like that happen, and it's a true tragedy. And one of the things that I hate that it turned into a kind of like semi-political game, but I mean, I guess I shouldn't have been surprised, right? Like, I guess with American politics, that's just what happens, right? Like, everybody turns it into a thing. Yeah. I'll hop on that comment in just a second, Martin. But yeah, so yeah, it's like it's a shame that we have to use a tragedy in to try to gain political currency, right? And that seems to be the game that's being played right now. But both sides do it all the time. But it's always disappointing every time I see it. So like the Texas flood comes in and people are like, oh yeah, it's Trump's fault. I'm like, Trump made it rain? Like, explain to me exactly what happened that made it Trump's fault. I'm not sure exactly how that logic works, but meanwhile, it's like, Trump's responsible for the flood somehow because he fired unrelated people in unrelated fields and unrelated departments. I'm like, all right, yeah, you lost me. So, but in any case, I do appreciate those who have offered solidarity and prayers to those in Texas. I hope that those families are able to recover, because that is just a nightmare to deal with. That's like your whole life is gone, your house is gone, all your property is gone. Like people who got out of there in time, which they didn't have much time, they probably got out of there with like very few belongings. So I'm just happy that they were able to save their lives and the lives of their loved ones for those who were. But anyway, I'm hearing some rumors about cloud seeding. I don't know how knowledgeable you guys are on cloud seeding, but I know only the bare basics. So I'd like to take some more time to research that before I weigh in on that whole concept. But I don't want to steer you false. So I want to make sure I've got my ducks in a row before I say anything on that. But I did want to let you guys know that I am at least listening to the grapevine. I'm listening to it. The other big story this week that I wanted to just briefly touch on is the Epstein list, right? So everybody's losing their mind now that the Trump is doing like the whole Trump two-step. The administration doing like the Trump two-step to try to evade any kind of liability or responsibility with working with the Epstein list and the Epstein suicide and or murder, as you might think. Give me just a second. I'm going to read what Tanya has to say. Wait, that isn't what people are blaming Trump for. They're blaming Trump for defunding. Right. So again, I mentioned it very, very quickly at the very end. You were probably halfway through typing your comment, but basically what they're blaming Trump for is for defunding people, firing people in that would have been helpful in getting the warning out. The problem is, though, is that everybody in that department has already weighed in and said that no, they're fully staffed. No, the defunding that took place happened in other departments, right? Trump didn't defund the warning system, the early warning system for weather broadcasting, right? He doesn't have any, and even if he did, it would be a situation where the state would still be responsible for managing that, not the federal government. So it's basically two levels away from having anything to do with Trump. Now I know that might seem like not what you've been told on the news, because the news lies, and I get that. But yeah, this has absolutely nothing to do with Trump or his administration or even the early warning system, right? It has nothing to do with any of that. They gave people as much time as they could. They just, sometimes these things creep up on them real fast. And they gave like 4 or 5 warnings, but like it was all overnight, so you might have been asleep, and if you didn't have your phones on, or it was on silent or something, because I turned mine on silent. All the messages I get overnight, I wouldn't have probably picked up until water started racing into my room. Then it would have been like, oh, got to get on out of here. But anyway, so back to Epstein for just a brief moment. One of the things that's going on with Epstein is that I think there's this fundamental misconception about what the Epstein files really are, right? What the Epstein list really is, right? Because people, when people talk about this, they talk about they talk about the Epstein list like it's like a physical little black book that Epstein kept all of his illegal activity in, and all of the people that he did business with, and wrote it out in perfect list form so that we could just go look at it like it was a spreadsheet. That's not what the Epstein list is. The Epstein list is a huge, enormous bunch of files that has every piece of possible information that you could want to think about trying to have for Epstein, or any wiretaps that were associated with any FBI investigation, or with anything like that involving flight logs or anything. So this stuff is all one really, really nebulous. It's not like you'd be able to look at these files and be like, oh, Bill Clinton went to Epstein Island on this day and slept with this number. It's not like that. It is not like where you just get the information right off the list, right? It's just all these hundreds and thousands of lines of text in thousands of different files that the FBI has compiled over years of work. It's not like there's this magical Oh, this person's guilty. Yay, we found no, that's not how it works. Okay, so that's with the Epstein list. So let's see. Tanya says, I have a comment about that. Trump was saying that he didn't think this list was well. So I think you were a little bit confused about what Trump was saying. The Trump quote that I know, maybe I missed one though, but I'll admit that I maybe missed a cycle on this. But the Trump quote that I saw was that he's kind of tired of people asking the same old questions about Epstein, because people have been on Epstein since the very beginning. Now, I think Epstein's still a very big deal, and I think that Trump was I think he was in poor taste to try to rush people past it. But of course, this is very common for politicians, right? So like this is what they do. It's like a pivot, right? What Trump is trying to do is rush everybody onto the next news item, because what he doesn't want to admit is essentially an embarrassment to the administration, which is that they don't really have anything, right? Because for so long everybody's been under the idea that as soon as Pam Bondi comes in and Kash Patel comes in, that they're going to solve all of the problems, right? They're going to catch Epstein red-handed and everybody that's involved with it red-handed. And now they like go through all the information. They don't have much, or they do have something and they don't want to share it. And one of those two is taking place. And so, of course, they're trying to like rush it on past and get people. Yeah, please do. Tanya, if you get that video, send it to me. I saw somebody ask Trump about it was it either today or yesterday, and Pam Bondi was like about to answer, and Trump's like, wait, why are you guys still asking about this, right? Like, I'm tired of you asking, or something along those lines, which doesn't really mean it's not important, but it does mean that he's trying to rush people past it, right? So I'm just going to go ahead and throw this because this isn't the center of my thing tonight. I'm just going to go ahead and give you my personal opinion on this matter. I think that the Epstein issue is very important. I think that I'm not happy to see large quantities of extremely powerful people doing something so absolutely disgusting. So I'd like it if we could catch every single one of them and throw them behind bars. Somehow this thing has thousands of victims, but only like all of a sudden when it's time to find the people responsible, it's like he's gone. Like it's all missing. So that pisses me off. And moreover, I think it was an insult to our intelligence as American people for them to come up with the excuses that they did about the Epstein, like the whether or not he killed himself or not. The video. So there was a video. For those of you who don't know, there was a video released showing like the final moments of the video outside the cell block where Epstein was being kept with a bunch of other inmates, right? So they showed the last little while, before Epstein died. And the video, number one, doesn't show anything because it's not showing the cell block. It's showing outside the cell block. The video that was supposed to be in the cell block somehow mysteriously missing, which I think is like, duh, something's going on, right? And then the video outside the cell block is missing a minute, like a key minute at a key time. And I'm like, and then Pam fed us some ridiculous excuse like, oh, they said that minute's missing every night. And I'm like, what? That's the stupidest excuse I've ever heard in my entire life. If anybody falls for that, I think you're being ridiculous. Not that it matters anyway, because it's not like we were going to see anything outside of the cell block anyway. I bet good money that if Epstein was offed, that he was offed by somebody who was in the cell block. They probably hired one of the other inmates to do it or something, or coerced Epstein to give himself, to self-terminate based on, some form of leverage that they had over him, or, friends or family. So I don't know. But I think that it's ridiculous. The excuse they gave, I thought that was pathetic. And if anybody falls for that, they're crazy. So anyway, I think, yeah, I mean, the fact that the video is missing, and the fact that he was supposed to have a cellmate and his cellmate was mysteriously transferred out the night before he died. and was not replaced. I mean, there's far too many coincidences. I don't subscribe to that many coincidences. That's ridiculous. That's my opinion on the matter. You don't have to agree with me, but that's just my thought on it. I think the list is important. If whatever form it takes, I don't think it's a list per se, but I think that they do have probably some information. If I had to guess, make an educated guess, I would say that Trump found information that was either damaging to his allies and he wants to keep it quiet, or it was powerful leverage over his adversaries and he wants to use it as like blackmail. That would be my educated guess. Now, I don't know this. I don't have evidence really enough to support that. That's just my educated guess. It could be gross negligence. Like Martin says, it's possible. What one thing that I will admit is that incompetence often looks like malpractice. It often looks like in intended malfeasance, intended harm. But so that it could be just incompetence, but I think this is more illicit than that. That's just my opinion. Anyway, all right, on to the main topic, the big thrust of tonight, and that is racism. Racism is one of the most overused words in our vocabulary today. It has gotten to the point where I probably can't go a single hour online without looking at it, without hearing that word in some form. Hey, Scott, how's it going? Welcome aboard. And it's gotten really ridiculous because racism is one of those words where it really just doesn't have any power unless it is used as sparingly as the true meaning of the word would normally require, right? So we're going to talk about racism. We're going to talk about how it's thrown like a frisbee every day in the news to Trump, to Elon Musk, to the left, the right, to the police, to the Republicans, that like on and on and on. Every day I hear racism, 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 racism. And it is just, it drives me nuts because number one, it's unfortunately a very painful word to hear, right? It's not a very friendly word. It's not a happy word, right? People don't like talking about racism. They don't like talking to racists, obviously, or about racists. So it's just one of those things that we're going to have to cover today, unfortunately, despite how painful it might be. So the first thing I want to talk about is my definition for racism, and I really feel like this is the definition for racism, but I will admit that over the years, what the word means has gotten bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. It's gotten to the point where that word has expanded. And for those of you guys who watch my show a lot, you know that I hate when one side or the other in politics co-opts a word. They take a word and they start ballooning it to the point where it means something completely different from what it meant to begin with. So this is what I think racism means. Racism is the belief that a race, ethnic background, or skin color is inherently subhuman. And I want to say that again. It means you believe that they're inherently subhuman, less worthy of human dignity and respect. Now, it doesn't mean that you think they're inferior in a certain aspect. For example, if I were to say the words, white men can't jump, that is not racism. It might be racial stereotyping. It might be prejudice, but it is not racist to say white men can't jump. Why? Because if you refer back to my definition, to say white men can't jump doesn't automatically deprive white people of human dignity and respect. I don't jump very high. My knee is injured. I'm still every bit the human I was a year ago when my knee was fine and I jumped higher, right? So not being able to jump doesn't deprive you of human dignity and respect, which is why that's not racism, right? And so there's a lot of words like this, like racism, prejudice, bias, racial stereotyping, racial hatred, and all of these words are kind of adjacent to each other. And so it's important to like go through them and explain the differences, right? right? So that when someone says like white men can't, when someone says, oh man, white people they can't dance, they don't have soul or something like that's like they don't have rhythm. These are things that may or may not be true. It may be false statements, right? Right? It may be something that someone is just being prejudicial about, or it may be true, right? Like, I don't know. Who knows? If you were to like somehow average all of the white people in America and see how high they can jump, and then average all the African Americans in America and see how high they can jump, and then one is going to be higher than the other, right? And then if you were to make that, maybe it's a statistically accurate statement. Who knows? But it's not important. What's important is it's not racist, okay? And while you could still say something like that with nefarious intent, you could still say something like that and mean it badly. Like you could be like, wow, none of y'all can jump. Like, whatever, right? It's not that big of a deal to me. Like if someone told me I can't jump, I'm like, yeah, okay, all right, whatever. But I can understand, that those type of statements can still be meant to inflict harm, but that doesn't make them racist, right? We've gotten to the point where racism has grown from originally meaning that the belief that someone is subhuman to any action taken that might indicate that someone has that belief to any implicit bias that someone might be showing through those actions to any, like, it's gotten bigger and bigger and bigger to the point now where, and I kid you not, I have literally heard people say the words, everyone on earth is racist. And what they mean isn't that everybody on earth is racist. What they mean is everybody on earth is biased, right? Those are two different things. All right. What happens is when you are born, right, from the moment you're born, humans form value hierarchies, right? So the moment you're born, you imprint on the first mammal you see. Usually it's your mother, right? So you see your mother and you're gonna imprint on that person. This is all mammalian habits, right? And so after you've imprinted on your mother, the next person you're usually gonna see is your father, but not always, right? So you might see your father, then you're gonna see your family, your friends, your siblings, right? Each one of those circles of influence, as you get further and further from the center, further from the very first person you see, you are going to naturally feel more comfortable with those people, right? I am naturally more comfortable with my mother and father than basically anybody else on earth. That doesn't make me racist to say that I'm more comfortable being in the presence of my father than some random dude from the Congo that I've never met. That's not racism. All right? That's bias, right? And everyone's got it. Hey Vicky, how you doing? Welcome aboard. And so just because everyone's got bias, this is the thing, bias even because of its adjacency to racism is kind of like one of those dirty words. People act like it's a bad thing. It's not always a bad thing. Sometimes it is, right? Bias becomes bad when you allow it to let you make poor decisions. That's when it becomes bad. But as long as you understand that bias is inevitable and that everybody has some and that you're aware of yours and you don't let it make bad decisions. Matter of fact, sometimes it can actually encourage you to make good decisions if you're very, very self-aware, right? If you know about your bias and you can make sure that your behavior is adjusted accordingly, it can actually help. But people are very, very used to like, people conflate those two words, right? They do it all the time. They'll push racism and bias and prejudice, all that stuff, they'll push it together. Prejudice is a different word, right? Prejudice means that you are judging someone in advance based on your bias, right? Yeah, definitely, right. If Martin says if you pretend you're not biased, it could be very dangerous, right? If you pretend you're not when you are, but even so, as long as you're still making good decisions, to be fair, we all try to pretend like we're not biased at times. It's just one of those things. It's just like everybody does it. It's just kind of like it's the type of virtue signaling that basically every human on earth has. So prejudice would be, judging someone in advance based on your biases, which sometimes, again, can be a good thing. It might sound like it's a bad word, but it can be a good thing. For example, if you're in the jungle somewhere and you've never been in this jungle before and you see a large cat with stripes, the cat weighs about 350 pounds, you might not know that particular cat, but you could probably prejudge what that cat is capable of. right? A lot of prejudice is, in fact, just a defense mechanism. It is something that helps us stay alive. It's something that helps us make sure that we make good decisions for our safety. Sometimes it makes us make bad decisions for our safety, right? One of the classics is like I can't remember exactly how this hypothetical goes, but it's a very very classic one. It's like you're walking down the street at night and you see a bunch of guys in the distance, right? And they're all like, for example, it doesn't matter which way you do. You could be like Hispanic or African American or whatever the hypothetical is. And it's like the question is, do you cross the street at night, right? Well, it depends a lot on who you are, on what you see in front of you, right? Like if you see a bunch of, like if I see a bunch of African Americans down the street and they're all wearing like, suits and ties and polished shoes, right? If I see a bunch of white people that are wearing gang colors, I'm probably crossing the street, even though I'm white. Like it's got nothing. Sometimes it has nothing to do with race, right? There's a lot of different variables in that equation, right? So these are like, that's what that does is it doesn't test racism. It tests prejudice. It tests what decisions you would make based on your prejudgment of somebody, based on your biases or your experiences with them in the past, right? And like, I would basically cross the road anytime I saw gang colors, regardless of who it was. That's just me. And thankfully, I'm lucky. In my background, I was born in raised in East Durham, and I lived there my whole life. And East Durham, for those of you who don't know, is a very, very diverse place. I actually was when I was until I was uh I think until I was, man, really until I left high school. By the time I was in high school, it was about 50-50 where I was living, about 50 white, 50% white, 50% black. But until like I got into high school, I was lived in a predominantly African American area. So, I mean, I learned to appreciate diversity a lot earlier than most do, which is nice, right? So I have that advantage, right? I have the advantage of like not really having like a racial preference, I guess. But I'm still going to have the bias for my family. I'm still going to have, that's always going to be there no matter what I do. All right. So that's a little bit of the differences between some of those words. One thing that I would mention too, one thing that we didn't really cover was racial hatred isn't necessarily racism, right? You could hate, for example, I had my very last girlfriend hated all black guys. I don't know. She was black. She hated all black guys. She dated me because I'm white, I guess. I don't know. Or maybe hopefully for other reasons too, right? But like, she just hated up. But I mean, she wasn't necessarily doing that because she was racist. I think she was doing it because she had a bad experience with, two, three, four, five. I don't know exactly how many of them, but it wasn't necessarily a decision of hers saying that they were subhuman, just that she didn't like culturally maybe what was going on or so. I don't know. I don't know. I didn't talk with her much about it because again, this isn't always a pleasant conversation, right? Right. We don't like talking about racism much, but we have to talk. Now, one other thing I want to mention about racism regarding the definition, it's got no element of power in it, right? I see a lot of people make this mistake. They'll say that, for example, I've heard these words, for example, black people can't be racist against white people because black people don't have the power in America, which couldn't be more ridiculous. I mean, that's probably the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard, right? It's got nothing to do with power, right? You can think somebody's subhuman whether you're on top or on bottom. And matter of fact, you're probably more inclined to think someone is subhuman if you have been hurt. Like if you're on bottom and you've had their power dynamic thrust in your face a bunch of times, you're more likely to hate somebody. You're more likely to feel like somebody is subhuman. You're more likely to lack appreciation for that person. But that doesn't by any means guarantee it. You can definitely experience that from the top. You can experience it from the bottom. You can experience it sideways. Anybody can have racism. Anyone, right? It's got no element of power in it. All right. Another thing that I want to differentiate as not racist is criticizing of government. Now, the reason I mention that is because in recent times, I have noted that people who criticize specifically the Israeli government get accused of a type of racism called anti-Semitism, right? And with regard to anti-Semitism, it's really weird. I'm not even actually sure if that's racism or if it's like religiousism, or if it, it's kind of like a conjunction of the two. It's kind of weird because this is like an ethno-religious state. But it's important that I note that the Israeli government isn't the Israeli people, right? You can still basically criticize the government and their actions without being anti-Semitic. And matter of fact, I do it all the time. I would criticize any government on earth. I don't have any qualms about that, as you've noted on this channel many times, right? Another thing that I want to differentiate from being like what is definitely not racist are things like isolationism, right? So in recent politics, you'll have a lot of people, for example, that want to build a wall to protect the border. Now, this is a lot of these actions. One of the things that it's important to note is that while somebody might have this belief or have this action, it might point to racism, but it also might not, right? And it's with me, it is just so immensely important not to accuse somebody of being racist unless you are absolutely 100%, and I don't mean 99.9%, I mean 100% sure. Because that's the kind of accusation that can literally destroy someone's life. It can destroy their job, it can destroy their relationships, their marriage, their family, it can destroy their careers, it can destroy their reputation, their history, everything. You can literally take everything away from somebody if you successfully make that people around that person believe that that person is racist. So it is so vitally important not to throw that accusation out unless you are 100% sure. So when I see this happens a lot in American politics, somebody will say, "Hey, look, I'm MAGA. I want to build a wall to make sure that we keep illegal immigrants out." Right? And they may say it in a way that avoids culpability while they may actually be racist. But because we can't know that, you can't throw that accusation out, right? Because I wanted a wall and I'm not racist. And I know that I'm not racist. I'm not even remotely close to race. I probably been in love with more African American women and more Hispanic women than I have white women. Right? And I know that doesn't definitively tell you that I'm not racist either, but I can promise you I'm about as far away from racist as it gets, and I still wanted a wall. Why? Because I wanted to keep illegal immigrants out. I want legal immigration, right? But it's one of those things that the moment somebody is like hard against immigration, the moment people want to deport illegal immigrants, it's like that word gets thrown out. It's like racism, racism, racism. It's like a battering ram that is used to try to shut down conversation politically, right? And that is how it's used because I once did a study online of the kind of like debate tactics that the left and the right use, and they use very different tactics, but both of them have their own cudgels, right? This one is very, very, very often used by the left. They use the words racist, bigot, homophobe, transphobe, like things that would attack somebody's like empathies, things that would attack somebody's heart. The right uses things that would attack somebody's mind. They say stupid, idiot, moron, stuff like that, right? And they curse more. But so this is just like a very common practice in political discussions. They'll have a cudgel to try to shut down conversation. This is the left's cudgel. Another thing that I want to talk about is the origin of racism in America. One of the interesting things that sets America apart from basically any other place on earth is we had our own type of slavery, a type of slavery that wasn't anywhere else in the world. Now, of course, they had slavery everywhere, right? But we had a very special type, and the reason we had it, and for those of you who are less familiar with history, it was because actually of our Declaration of Independence and our Constitution, right? Because our Declaration of Independence said it in like bold face, all men are created equal, and life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness are the unalienable rights that all people have, right? The only way we could justify slavery at that point is by saying, well, if all men have these rights, we would have to claim that these people aren't men, right? And that's where this this concept of racism comes from. We made them subhuman so that we could justify removing rights that would otherwise belong to all human beings, right? Now, of course, we know better now, right? We know that that was absolutely absurd and that those morons had no idea what they. And thankfully, you know what? America was among the two nations that eliminated slavery. So, and I thank God for that. It was basically dated from the moment we had a Declaration of Independence. From that moment forward, it was like, and all the founding fathers knew it too. And if you read their writings, they say that. They say, like, after that, there's no way that slavery can survive in this nation. It can't. Every single one of them knew that it was over. That's why Jefferson got rid of the Atlantic slave trade very early. That's why it didn't last, because with those words in bold, with that being our setup, our systemic setup, they knew that it wouldn't work, right? They knew that we would have to be able to grant equal rights across the board, or we wouldn't be true to ourselves, right? Now, that brings us to the next concept, which is what people call systemic racism. Now, this is another one of those like catchwords, these buzzwords that has a lot of different meanings to a lot of different people. Again, I'm going to give you my definition, right? Because I'm going to go by the words themselves. We just discussed what racism is. That is the belief that a race, ethnic background, or skin color is subhuman, and a system, right? All right, system would be like a design of activity or regulations or laws or policies, essentially, right? So, in order for a system to be racist, the system itself would have to be propagating of, there would have to be the continuation of racist concepts, like racist theory. So basically, you can have, it's important to note that you can have a system set up by racist people that isn't racist. And you could have a system set up by non-racist people that is racist because they just either they didn't know what they were doing or they were neglectful, right? But one thing that I want to give my judgment on, pass my opinion on, is that America's system is no longer racist. Now, it may have been at one point in time, right? Because slavery, of course, was a very racist proposition. And, you know, Jim Crow and redlining and on down the line, like you can go on down the line, and there's fields full of policies that affected a particular race differently. And those, I'm against that in basically every context, right? And there's still some contexts today that exist that are they're on the edge. Like, for example, I would say affirmative action is on the edge, right? Now, I just got a comment from David Lipke. No, it's the practice of a race and it's superior to any other human. Yeah. So that's basically what I was talking about with regard to racism. Now, systemic racism adds an extra word to that, right? So if you were to have an entire race practice the same thing, then yeah, you could maybe condense the practice into systemic racism. But the problem is, I don't think that you'll ever find an entire race practicing the same concepts or the same, the same policies or procedures. Even in America here, we're not all one race. So like, even if we passed a law tomorrow that said like, white people, like for example, Mom Donnie wants to pass a special white tax in New York City, right? I mean, even if he passes that, I wouldn't call that a systemically racist law. I would call it just stupid, right? Just really, really stupid. Because again, it wouldn't be something that would affect the entire system. It would just be something that would affect a very, very microscopic location. Thankfully, because I don't think he'll get it passed. I mean, it's one of those things where anytime you have preferential treatment of a race, I'm against that. 100% against it. But they won't always necessarily be racist, right? It might sometimes it just be corrective, or there's a lot of different ways that it can come out. But in any case, I'm against any time a race is treated differently. I want all races to be treated evenly. So with regard to systemic racism, what a lot of people will say is that it even incorporates the people inside the system, which I don't like. I think that's a bad definition. I think so. For example, like what I'll hear a lot of times is they'll say because a police officer, for example, is racist, or an FBI officer, or a caseworker, something like that is racist, and they are part of who's responsible for executing the system, then they would just say that the whole system is racist. Not to me, that doesn't make any sense. To me, I think that's ridiculous. I think that if the individual is racist, then the individual is racist, right? And if the system is racist, it's because that person has put policies into place that are racist, right? So, like for example, slavery would be racist, right? But the individual that puts slavery into practice, that's just an individual racist, right? It would take the law or the policy to encompass whatever that racist person is putting out before the system is racist. So, like for example, right now, one of the troubles I have with the concept of systemic racism, everybody says things like America's racist because of where it has been in the past, right? Because it had slavery a long, long time ago. They'll say that America is now still systemically racist because its roots were racist. Now, that's a genetic fallacy. That's not accurate, right? That's logically fallacious, but also it doesn't make any sense because what if it's been corrected? And it has. We don't have slavery anymore, right? We don't have redlining anymore. All of these things are decades old, right? Jim Crow, decades old. We don't have anything that even approaches a racial preference except for things like affirmative action, which just went away. Mom Donnie's trying a couple of things, but like aside from that, we basically have left all of our systemically racist things in the past. So when I hear these words, usually the first thing I think is, we have a critical race theorist on our hands, right? So for those of you guys who don't know what critical race theory is, critical race theory is basically a graduate level course, that sociological course that basically teaches that because of the roots of systemic racism, that America will basically forever and be systemically racist, and that these injustices will pervade forever. Now, this critical race theory has a lot of problems with it. It's one of those things where it's kind of like, for those of you who are familiar with Marxism, it's very similar to Marxism. It's a very, very small lens through which to view American politics through. And while it may turn up interesting research within the scope of that lens, because the lens is so small, because it's so refined, you basically miss everything outside the lens, right? You miss everything that lens colors over. And so because you're missing everything outside the lens, you're basically missing out on all of the practical application, right? And so there's some interesting research to be done there. I won't take anything away from the graduate level course, but the problem is it really should stay a graduate level course. The problem is it doesn't. It trickles down. Every time an affluent, educated group comes up with a new concept like that, it ends up eventually trickling down to younger and younger people, and like less and less affluent people, until the point where everyone's starting to spit out the same thing, right? Like, for example, my son went to Lowe's Grove Middle School in Durham, North Carolina, not too long ago, which is a very, very impoverished area, very mostly African American, right? And he'd have kids coming to him up on in school every day saying, "You owe us for slavery," right? Like, you owe us money for slavery. Like, my son has to give them reparations, right? Even though my son has never even been related to anyone who's ever had anything to do with slavery since our family was enslaved 500 years ago, right? Like, nothing to do with slavery. And most of the kids that would tell him that also had nothing to do with slavery. And yet, that's their version of critical race theory, basically, because they don't understand the graduate level course. These are kids in a middle school. So they'll spit it back out at him in the lowest common denominator type of form. And it's unfortunate that that's what happens. But this is why it's so important that classes like that, Marxist classes, stay in their hyper academic area, because outside of that, it's just not good for anybody. It just doesn't help. Okay. The next thing I want to talk about is how racism presents, right? Because when people talk about systemic racism, a lot of times what they're talking about isn't actual racism. What they're talking about is a disparity in results from one race to another, right? Because they're not actually like watching this, when they do this research, they're not actually watching the interactions. What they're usually doing is pooling data from like the FBI database, and then they come back with like some kind of like spreadsheet showing that, like, for example, that African Americans get pulled over by police officers more than Caucasian Americans. And it's like, okay, but is that why they got pulled over? Because the system is racist, or even because the individual is racist, right? But there's no way to determine that because of a different fallacy called the third cause fallacy. Anytime there's another option for why something took place, then you can't determine that any correlation is a cause, right? So because they find that there's a correlation here between, because more African Americans get pulled over, the first thing they think is, oh, well, it must be racism. Well, you can't do that because it could be a million other reasons. One of the biggest reasons is that what happens is they conflate racial disparity with socioeconomic disparity, right? Because a lot of times what happens is research is done, and what they're looking at isn't that African Americans are getting pulled over more. What they're looking at is that poor people are getting pulled over more, right? It just so happens that a greater percentage of African Americans live in poor districts. And so when the African Americans are getting pulled over, it's because of the amount of policing often that's being done in those poor zones. Now, that isn't to say that there might not be a racist cop. I'm sure there are, right? I'm sure there's racist people everywhere, but you can't prove it from the research. You will never know unless you actually watch the interactions take place. And moreover, I would always want to know why somebody wouldn't take that next step and drill down to the individual level anyway, right? Like, let's say you've got a report on your desk and you're like a police chief, right? And it says that, this last month, your police department pulled over far too many African Americans and like almost no white people. I'm like, okay, why don't you drill down to that next level and find out why? Right? Why would we want to stop and call it a systemic problem? Why wouldn't we go to the next level and say, like, all right, well, I reviewed all of my police, files and found out that these three guys are responsible for like 9/10 of it. Then I would say you've identified your problem, right? Or they happen to be the people patrolling the poor zone, right? Either way, if you drill down to that next level, you can solve the problem of whether or not this is systemic or individual. I don't know why we wouldn't go to the next level and find out what the individual problems are anytime they're available, right? But I am curious to hear what you guys have to say about that. So I've already mentioned the cost of the accusation of racism, right? Like, and that's usually the goal too, right? Like when people call Trump racist, what they're trying to do, of course, is damage his political career. Whether or not he's actually racist probably has very little to do with the accusation. They want to damage his political career. They wanted to do the same thing to Elon Musk. That's why they fought so hard when he did his little salute that was awkward and spastic and autistic or whatever he was doing, right? So that what they wanted to do was they wanted to damage them politically and personally, right? And maybe business wise, right? So that's the game that's being played. That's the cost, right? Yeah, it is also a way to call people low class. I agree. And so, right, like even in Elon's case, right, even though the Anti-Defamation League, which like is a league that is basically that's what they do is they do this research to determine who is actually racist or who is actually a Nazi or who is actually anti-Semitic, right? And even the Anti-Defamation League said no, this was Elon Musk's salute was not a Nazi salute. But despite the fact that Elon and Trump have both helped like hundreds and hundreds of I think Trump is Jewish actually, or his family is, or something like that. Despite that, like people will still throw these slurs around, right, to try to dismiss their arguments, to try to to damage them politically, to try to hurt them in any way possible. Now, another thing I wanted to talk about today is something called cultural appropriation. And this is one of my biggest adversaries politically, because I think cultural appropriation is kind of the silliest thing that I've ever heard of in my life. Now, my father was a jazz pianist for all of his life. He plays jazz music, and guess what? My father's Italian. He didn't invent jazz. Italian people didn't invent jazz. Now, the concept that my father couldn't engage in that type of music because he didn't invent it is the stupidest thing I've ever heard of in my life, right? And I want to differentiate that from somebody who is trying to be depreciating to a race, right? If you're going out trying to do something like to hurt another race's feelings, okay, then you're just a jerk, right? And you need to get whatever slammed online or whatever. But if you're just out there trying to like appreciate a type of music, a hairstyle, a type of clothing, whatever, any cultural aspect, if you want to eat, cook and eat a certain type of food, and your race didn't invent that type of food, tough crap. Okay, guys? Like, get a little thick skin, because it's just ridiculous. Like, if you're upset because somebody else is eating a tamale and your race made it, oh my God. If you're upset that somebody else is braiding their hair and you think that your race has exclusive rights to a braid, which, by the way, braids have been around for like thousands and thousands and thousands of years, and I think they were Norse originally. But that's not even the point. The point is, like, if you're losing your mind over somebody wearing okay, a big one is like Halloween. Like, people wear costumes, and everybody loses their mind. They're like, oh my gosh, they're wearing like a Native American costume. I'm like, oh my God, get over it. Get over it. They're not out there trying to hurt your feelings. This kid likes Native Americans. That's it. Like, this isn't rocket science, guys. It shouldn't be that difficult. And the same thing goes for comedians, right? If a comedian makes a joke, right, and it's a joke. If you don't want to hear that type of joke, then don't listen to the comedian. Don't go to his show or her show. I don't understand somebody that could lose their mind over comedy. It drives me nuts. Anyway, those are my personal like pet peeves that just get on my nerves. And then, yeah, right. Like the costumes, it'll be interesting to see what costumes. It's funny. One of the things that was traditional Halloween, ironically, and this will be interesting for some of you, it was actually cross dressing. That's like a traditional Halloween costume. I know it seems silly. I would never do it, but it's funny that we see that now like every other day of the year except for Halloween. Um, uh, Another thing that I wanted to bring up, I took an implicit bias test not too long ago online. You can find them online if you look for them. I thought it was funny because I took it like 11 times and answered differently each time. Sometimes like trying to sound as racist as I could, and sometimes trying to like specifically avoid anything that even gave the remote semblance of racism. And I ended up getting what was it, like mildly implicitly biased every single time, like all 11 times. So I have to think that test is a crock of, it's just worthless. So maybe someone else can explain it to me. Maybe I'm doing something wrong. Part of it though is kind of weird too, because it's like hand motions. It's like and a lot of it is like pattern recognition. So you could be like going left, right, left, right, left, right, and then left was the wrong answer or whatever, made you seem more biased or something. But it's like, it had nothing to do with the bias. It had to do with the fact that I was going left, right, left, right, left, right. I don't know. Maybe I'm taking it wrong. Maybe someone can explain it to me later, but yeah. So a couple of things that I do want to touch base on that I do think are I don't know if I would call them racist, but they definitely are approaching what I would say is a signifier of racism, right? Uh, the word like the words white privilege are dangerous to me, and here's why. It's not the words that's the problem. What's the problem is often what's behind it, and that is there seems to be every person I've heard those words from, there's this like phantom behind it where because they assume the privilege of a white person, they also assume that white person hasn't faced adversity, right? Hasn't learned to overcome strife, right? And that's dangerous, right? So like it'd be one thing to like just think somebody's rich because that's a nothing thing. I mean, I can tell when someone's rich, any day of the week, and it's not a problem. But I would never assume that that rich person hasn't learned to overcome adversity. In fact, I would assume that they've done it better and faster than the next guy. Hi, Ayana, how you doing? Welcome aboard. So if you ever, if you hear those words, that doesn't necessarily mean a racist thing, but it's getting to the point where I feel like that's dangerous territory because you're attacking not just like the fact that that person's wealthy or they have access to more agency. You're starting to attack the core of their character. You're basically assassinating their character. Now, again, you could do that without being racist. You could do that without being biased, but not necessarily. Like you might, that's heading in that zone, right? Affirmative action is another one of those dangerous zones, right? Like it's anytime I see racial preferential treatment, I'm always against that. So anytime I see something like the white tax that Mom Donnie is about to pass, or things where people say like Black Lives Matter, right? Just the name itself is kind of like why would you say that? Because I would never say that I would never say white lives matter. That I would get destroyed, right? I would never say anything like that. It seems odd. And it's funny when people say Black Lives Matter and then someone else comes back with like all lives matter, then the next thing I hear usually is they're calling the people that say all lives matter, they're calling them racist. I'm like, what kind of sense does that make? So this is the person that doesn't have any preferential racial treatment, and then you're calling that group racist. So I don't know. Anyway, guys, that's basically all I had for you. I want to close with a Morgan Freeman quote. The best way to end racism is to just stop talking about it. Stop talking about race, right? I think we're too obsessed about race in general. We get to the point where we use this word 50,000 times a day, and it just drives me crazy. The best way to just get over racism, if I could wave the magic wand and make it a perfect world, I would just say that look, we're all one human race, and if we all treat each other like one human race, then we won't have any problems, right? The problem comes when you try to divide us into little groups and play the identity politics game and say that one group is better than another in any form. That's when you run afoul of danger. So just be cognizant of your biases because everybody's got them. It's not that big of a deal, but just be aware that they're there, and then try to make good decisions and treat people with respect, and everybody will be happier for it. Catch you guys next time on Common Mansplaining. Thanks so much for watching, guys.